Hey, everybody, this is TJR.
And this is Robert Kinsler.
And Robert, welcome back.
Hey, thanks, TJ. Good. Hey, it's good to be back.
It's good to have you back, man. I missed you. And
Yeah, likewise.
we have a lot to talk about, I'm sure, but we're going to just talk about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame right now. And I'm going to get some information here on my screen here. But we're just going to talk about the new nominees. The 2021 nominees were announced today.
Yeah, let's just say who they all are, and then we can talk. Maybe we should talk about our favorites.
Okay. So first of all, I'm just going to go over the list here.
Okay.
Mary J. Blige, Kate Bush, Devo, Foo Fighters, The Go-Go's, Iron Maiden, Jay-Z, Shaka Khan, Carole King, Fela Kuti, LL Cool J, New York Dolls, Rage Against the Machine, Todd Rundgren, Tina Turner, Dionne Warwick. And so any initial thoughts that you want to share first?
Well, what jumps out first is Todd Rundgren, I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, or someone will definitely correct us, has been nominated a few times. I'd really like to see him get in as a singer, a songwriter, a great multi-instrumentalist, and obviously a really celebrated producer. I mean, for so many reasons. And the other thing that's popping out is actually in my column this week, I reviewed the new Go-Go's documentary. Talks about the band, and I saw the Go-Go's when they were starting out, so they're a personal favorite, and also I guess they're the first all-female group to play their own instruments, write their own songs, and get a #1 album. So I mean, so you have to say that they're groundbreaking. I'd love to see the Go-Go's get in there as well. But I have other things to say, but love to hear what you want to
I'm
talk
just
about.
going to comment on the two you just mentioned here. I do want to comment on Todd Rundgren. I honestly feel that Todd Rundgren's time as a producer, as a record producer, is probably more influential than people realize than as a recording artist. I'm sure there are might be people who are of our generation who will remember his hit songs, his recorded work. But I think his work as a producer overshadows that. Although maybe people aren't always aware, Todd Rundgren produced that. But I feel his creds as a producer are far more influential. And I feel like that's the reason why he should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, his recorded work is great. Don't get me wrong. I'm not dissing it. But his work as a producer, I think, has cast a bigger shadow over the history of rock and roll.
And I would agree with that. But to me, it's collectively all those things that he's done, why he's important, but yeah, no, well said. And I know he's been recognized with the nomination previously, but it was nice to see him back this year. Maybe this year we can somehow get him over the finish line.
Sure. And now you mentioned the Go-Go's.
You think about a group like the Go-Go's, they're not, they don't have this massive impact like U2 or the Rolling Stones. They don't have a really long history and things like that. But I think that there's something to be said for a group like that comes along at a certain moment in time, and they kind of propel music forward. But in the Go-Go's case, I think they inspired probably a lot of women. I remember when I was at the concert that I saw, there was a lot of young girls there, including girls that probably dreamed of being in a band, and not just going to see a band with a bunch of guys in it, but that they would have the opportunity to be the person up there on the stage. And I think that probably carries some real weight in their case.
Didn't the Runaways write their own songs? The Runaways?
Yeah, and they may have, but I don't think they never enjoyed kind of the commercial success.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, there's also the fact that they had all these big hits.
Right, exactly.
I get it.
And obviously there was other groups before that very successful, like Heart, that where women were the major reason in the band, or let's say a Jefferson Airplane with Grace Slick. But I mean, the Go-Go's were definitely their own thing there.
When I think of Heart and Jefferson Airplane or Jefferson Starship, that's a blended group.
That's a blended group, right?
You've got blending of male and female. And that brings up a point that I want to just mention here. My partner and I were talking about, all girl bands or the term all girl bands. And I think that we have to get away from, we don't talk about all guy bands. We don't say all male bands but we'd say all girl bands. We've had blended bands for decades now. Fleetwood Mac apart. We don't call them blended, but I mean, they've got men and women in the bands.
Right.
In the band, and we should stop saying. I think we should need to have to stop saying female bands.
Right. Right.
I mean, we both do it. We're both guilty of it, but I think we have to we just have to stop saying that. They're just bands.
Right.
Whether they
Exactly. And what I was going to say is that they made a point of bringing all that out in the documentary, so that's why it's even fresh on my mind. I hadn't really thought about that, and I wasn't, like you said, you weren't aware. I wasn't aware either that that they were the only group kind of still after all these decades later. After we're talking 40 years later, they're still the only rock band of all females that have had that kind of unique success. And that's, hopefully more groups like that will follow, but it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, okay. The Bengals, that actually makes me think about the Bengals too, a band that I like a whole lot better if we're going to talk about a band where all the members are female.
Right.
The Bengals, I don't think have ever been nominated. They've been around as long as the Go-Go's. They kind of came around during the same time period.
I think the Go-Go's came, as far as I know, they came up in the 70s as a punk band, and I don't recall when the Bengals
You're
came
right.
up.
You're right.
Yes, it was in the early 80s.
And I'm going to check real quick here. I'm just kind of curious. All Over the Place was their first album. When was it released? 1984.
Okay, so a little bit later. Yeah.
Yes, and the Go-Go's, let's see, 1981.
Yeah, 81. So a few years before that, and they paved the way for groups like the Bengals.
I'm willing to bet both those groups were playing the club scenes at somewhere around the same time,
Right.
very close to each other. Maybe one started earlier than the other. Maybe the one got signed quicker than the other. But we'd have to go research the history. But yeah, just to kind of put things in a little bit in perspective. So let's talk about. But I want to talk about those two that you just mentioned. Are there any others on the list that you want to talk about?
Well, a personal favorite is Devo, because I had never seen Devo and I happened to catch him at Coachella. And this is a photo actually behind me of I took at Coachella. And they were fantastic. And when I seeing them live, it gave me an appreciation of how unique they were, and just how fun they were. And so it was kind of nice to see them on the list. And then also it was really nice to see Carole King on the list, a great singer-songwriter. And so many people have covered her works, over the years. So it was great to see her recognized. And Tina Turner, definitely, she deserves to be recognized too. What a she had success with Ike, and then she went out probably and had much even greater success on her own.
Yeah, had a comeback in the 80s.
Yeah, had a huge comeback. And but no, a really good crop of artists, I think, this year.
I have to say that I mostly agreed with the picks this year too. I'm glad to see Rage Against the Machine getting nominated again. I hope they get in there. There are some who have argued that Rage their time hasn't come yet. They're still too young. But I think their impact and their innovation in how they combined rock with rap, with funk, with just blazing political messages, whether you agree with them or not, I think just their impact musically, socially, makes them worthy, in my opinion. And I agree with you about Tina Turner. Some say she should not be there because she's not rock, so to speak. She's R&B, she's soul. But I think she has been associated with rock many times. And it's hard to imagine rock without Tina Turner, in my opinion. And
I agree with that.
And I think her performances are very rock.
Yeah, exactly. Very powerful.
Let me talk about Kate Bush a little bit. How do you feel about Kate Bush?
I love Kate Bush. I don't know how, especially now, I don't know if American audiences are that familiar with Kate Bush. I mean, I think if you were around, listening to music in the 80s, but I think then she kind of fell off the radar, at least here. But I'm a tremendous fan of hers. I mean, a very interesting artist, very revolutionary artist, especially the kind of what she did with video and music together and stuff. And it was great to see her on that list.
I feel the same way. I know in Europe she's much more popular, and I consider, I was thinking, how do I define her music? I call it art pop, And once again, and we're going to talk about this in a moment, is the whole argument, is this rock? What does rock mean now? And when in regards to Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But yeah, I'm glad to see her there just because she's such an amazing artist as far as a songwriter. Let's talk about now. Of course, you mentioned Devo. I'm glad to see Devo in there too. I mean, but that's more of a bias because I always have really liked Devo.
You're right.
Just,
And I think a lot of these artists that over the years that maybe haven't got in, they have their really hardcore followers that love them and would like to see, and then there's the one, well, is their overall impact
Mhm.
worthy of them getting in there? And I think that's kind of the debate that everyone kind of has, like I saw on social media today, the usual things like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame sucks. And, those kind of things where people just get angry because the artist that they like hasn't been either nominated or gotten in, and we've talked about this in the past. I'm a huge fan of the Smiths. I would love to see the Smiths get nominated and get in there. So I get a little irritated that they never show up. But, that's a bias I have. And I'm sure you have a bias for an artist you'd like to see get in there,
I'll be honest. I don't worry about whether any artists I like do get in or don't get in. If they get in, great. I'm glad to see it for them. I don't need the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame or the Grammy Awards to validate my favorite artists.
Right.
They don't need it. Now, if they get that honor, great. I'm glad for them. I'm glad to see it happen. That means more people are going to be made aware of them by the fact that they're nominated or if they win an award. But my appreciation for them does not need to be validated by them. And I think that is something that I think goes deeply into people's psyche, is they get angry that these giant institutions aren't recognizing their favorite artists. I think it's they feel invalidated. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm completely wrong with that, but I sometimes suspect that.
And I mean, and I think I'm speaking for both of us, that we're fans of so many great artists, and many of them are under the radar.
Oh yeah.
Artists that probably are never going to get in, even ever be nominated. But I agree with you. That doesn't take away from our love and respect and, just absolutely being crazy about those artists. I mean, I'm thinking like of the Smithereens or Dada or Amy Mann, all these artists that are among my favorites that are probably not necessarily ever going to show up in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But that doesn't mean I'm going to stop listening to their music and loving their music.
They might eventually, as time goes on, as they develop more of a legacy. I have a feeling that pretty much everybody will at some point. So the Foo Fighters, I have no problem with them being there. I'm glad.
They're probably the biggest rock band of the last 20 years, and they're still scoring big hits and still successful. So I mean, that's a no-brainer. That I would like to see some of the other artists I've referenced that are a little bit more the legacy artists get in first. But there's no doubt that the Foo Fighters have had a tremendous effect. And when I talk to some of my younger friends and stuff that are crazy about that, you see how they've kind of kept the torch alive for rock, and that's great to see.
Yeah,
you got to celebrate that.
Iron Maiden. I'm not a fan, but I understand their legacy, and I'm really glad to see them nominated. I think they definitely deserve it. They have put in the work. They have a proven legacy. Even if I'm not a fan, I totally have no problem with it. I'm sure you don't either.
Yeah, exactly. Because I know some people like Iron Maiden's their band, exactly just like what you're saying. People are passionate, and this is a band that has a deep connection with its fan base, and I think that those bands are worthy to get in. I mean, I was a huge Rush fan. A lot of people just don't like Rush, but I think everyone can acknowledge the band has this tremendous ability to decade after decade to have this a deep and profound connection with its audience.
Carole King. Of course, I have to wonder if timing is part of this, because it's this big anniversary for Tapestry, the album. And so I wonder if there's timings involved. I don't know. But I mean, Carole King, I have no issues. I mean, Carole King, when you think about her legacy, there's her recording career, but there's also her career as a songwriter.
Yeah.
Some of the great rock, pop, and soul and R&B songs that Carole King has written. And that other artists, legacy artists, have recorded.
I believe, and this is a while ago when I interviewed Mickey Dolenz, I think he noted that she was like his favorite songwriter. And, the Monkees had some hits with
Yeah,
her music, but then he went on to record, many, many more of her songs, but he's not the only one. So many people have recorded
yeah.
her songs that she's done. Yeah.
There was some talk, well, does Carole King belong in rock? And it's like, well, I don't know. I mean, her music is pop. And like I said, there's a real blurred line between pop and rock, but
Exactly.
her legacy as a songwriter alone to me is enough for that. Which
Exactly.
is not to say I don't like her recorded material. I do. I love it.
Yeah.
So, okay. Let's see. Who else do we have here? We have Shaka Khan. I'm not real familiar. Are you?
No, I'm not real familiar beyond the hits. So
Yeah.
exactly, and some of the artists, even a group like the New York Dolls, almost as long as I've been listening to music, I've heard their name. I'm just not that familiar with their recordings.
New York Dolls, I understand they're in the same vein as bands like the MC5, who were kind of early pioneers in the genres that they were in, who didn't get like huge, giant commercial success. Other bands took inspiration from them and followed them. They were the trailblazers. And you know what they say? Trailblazers tend to get left on the roadside with arrows.
Yeah, I
Or,
agree. Kind of like
whereas, and then the ones who follow end up getting the success, who get influenced
right.
by them. And there are many groups who followed after them, who were influenced by them, that had the success. So
Right.
they're in that category. And they and like the MC5, the New York Dolls, in my opinion, deserve to be nominated just for their influence. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
that's where I think they had the impact. Let's talk about Fela Kuti. I'm familiar with who he is. Is he rock though? I was asking my partner about this, and she said, "Oh, I remember hearing Fela Kuti on." She said, "I think he should be there." She said, "I remember hearing him on K Rock during the '80s. That he was making, he was appearing on the alternative rock stations, the ones that were playing the new wave music during the '80s, like K Rock here in Los Angeles."
Uh-huh.
And she said, that he definitely had his impact on rock. And so she brought that up. I said, okay, that's something I wasn't aware of, because during the '80s I wasn't listening to K Rock.
Yeah.
And I was still being
And
a little Bowie.
I was somewhat, but again, I'm with you on that. I'm just not that familiar, you know. And I have to say that the same with Jay-Z and LL Cool J. I know them very well from seeing them on television and kind of some of the celebrity thing about, because they're
Yeah,
such big names,
yeah, the big
but I
stars.
don't have any of their recordings, and I haven't actually, because at that time when they were coming up, I was predominantly writing about Americana and rock,
Yeah.
and maybe alternative country or stuff. So they're just not as much on my radar. You
And
know?
of course, one of the biggest arguments is, does rap belong in the Rock Hall of Fame? Is it rock? Now Mary J. Blige, R&B. I've listened to Mary J. Blige. I've enjoyed a lot of her stuff. Um, is she rock, or is she no less rock than Tina Turner? And
Yeah.
this is, I think, where we start to get into the whole. Every year it's the same argument. My favorite artist didn't get nominated. How come this younger artist got nominated when this legacy artist didn't? But also, there's always this argument about the genres of R&B and the genre of rap, and do they belong in the Rock Hall of Fame? And it was interesting. I was listening to someone else's rant on this on the internet before we did this, and he felt, Mary J. Blige doesn't belong because she's R&B, she's not rock. But he felt that Tina Turner should.
Mhm.
And I thought to myself, well, wait a minute. He felt there should be a line drawn where it's like, this is rock and roll. This is, well, then how do you let Tina Turner in the door?
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to draw once you've let some artists of like with soul leanings or R&B leanings. Once you've opened
Yeah.
the door, let them in. Then it's hard to shut it and
How
say
do you,
the other
yeah,
one. Yeah,
how do you say this
yeah,
one shouldn't be? And of
yeah.
course, the other argument is that, blues music, huge influence on rock and
Huge
roll, which is
on rock.
why,
Yeah,
I have no problem with any legacy blues artists being in there.
right.
Yet we don't see
Yeah,
modern blues artists get nominated, like Joe Bonamassa.
right, right.
We don't see these more modern blues artists get nominated, um, when they probably sound more rock than a
Yeah,
lot of
exactly.
what's being released right now.
Right. You're
Um,
absolutely right. Exactly.
you
I
know,
mean, like you said, a Joe Bonamassa or the Tedeschi Trucks Band. I mean, this is some,
yeah,
great, or Walter Trout, who we're both fans of. I mean, this
yeah,
is some pretty hard hitting
yeah,
classic rock and roll that we're talking about, but
yeah.
it doesn't get any kind of love from kind of somebody like the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Yeah.
And yeah, and like I said, if you're going to allow blues in, and then you say, well, yeah, but a lot of R&B artists were hugely influential on rock, as much as rock was probably influential on them. There are tons of rock artists who will claim R&B artists and R&B music as influences.
Right.
So how can you not allow that in? How can you not, you know, acknowledge that?
Right.
And there was once a time when we really didn't have categories between what we call R&B and rock. There was a time, I think, when we weren't as categorical about it during the earlier days of rock, during the early days of Motown, during the early 60s. I don't think we really categorized things back then so much so, and I somewhere during the 70s we started doing it. And I think that was a wrong step when we
Yeah.
started doing that.
Yeah.
And I think part of it was done just to sell to certain audiences, to sell records, maybe,
Yeah.
do more concentrated sales. But at some point, like I said, the whole idea of R&B music to me, and I love R&B music.
Yeah.
I love
Yeah.
classic Motown. I love classic R&B. I love funk. And to me personally, there's no difference between that and
Yeah.
rock. It's all the
There's
same to
a lot
me.
of, like you mentioned, a lot of the great groups that I'm sure we both count among our favorites are able to cross pollinate and mix these different styles. Like I
Yeah,
know Beck wasn't nominated this year, but Beck, what style of music hasn't Beck done? He's done
yeah.
rock and pop and rap and all, experimental
Country.
music, and yeah,
Yeah, and
country.
experimental music. He's done all
Yeah,
of it. Yeah,
he's done all of it, and it's kind of, and that's kind of what the Beatles were doing in their time. They were doing everything,
yeah.
you know, and
I agree. And rock has always been about cross-pollinating genres, you know. Is Prince rock? Which I mean, it's like, but yeah, he is. Prince is
yeah,
rock, and yet at the same time, he's not.
yeah, yeah,
You know, so it's like this argument that this music is not rock. I more and more as I think about it, I'm having trouble accepting that we have this closed, rigid idea of what rock is. Like, is rock only guitar music? Is it only heavy? Is it only heavy, aggressive music? Is only rock and roll from the 50s rock and roll? There
uh-huh,
are some who say that's the only real rock and roll, the rock and roll of the 50s. Chuck Berry, Elvis Presley,
yeah,
Little Richard,
yeah,
Jerry Lee Lewis. That's the real rock and roll music. The rest of it, forget it. It's not.
yeah. It's
Um,
funny to think about that. Yeah, I think what it is I think over the years, I think especially radio started to really divide it, and they had such narrow formats, and it really kind of divided listeners and audiences, and also, unfortunately, it often led to a sameness within a genre, which I know we've both complained about, where some
yeah,
of the kind of more creative artists really aren't even given a chance to get on the radio
yeah.
because they don't fit into the narrow formats that have been defined, without picking on any radio stations. And that's been unfortunate, because I think that didn't used to be the case, where probably the Supremes and the Beatles could be back to back on a radio station. And whereas today, on a big station, you're not going to hear like a black soul group then next to a rock group. You're just not going to hear that anymore.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
That's what you just did. You just hit the nail on the head. You're absolutely right. And I can remember when radio was like that when I was a kid, where
Yeah.
you would hear Led Zeppelin right next to What a Wonderful World by Louis Armstrong. I can
Right.
remember those days when you could hear that much, radio, top 40 radio doing stuff like that. It was a
Yeah.
very different world.
Yeah.
Yes. But by the way, I do want to add, it's good for us to be finally complaining about it again after all this time.
Right.
Yeah. High
it's been
five.
a long time.
It's
Yeah.
very fun to be complaining about it again.
Well, it's good that we finally got, hey, it took the nominees being announced for 2021 to get us back together again.
Together again. Yes, absolutely. So let's address the other elephant in the room, which we've talked about R&B, is rap. And I know I initially was against rap being in the Hall of Fame when it was first happening, it was like, well, no, it's, that's not rock, and I've heard the argument, if there was a rap music hall of fame, would they let rock artists in?
Yeah.
Most of the people who ask that question immediately say, no, of course not, but you don't know, you know, you're just letting a bias show there. But, does rap belong in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame? And my answer was always no, until I heard it was Ice Cube, I think it was, if I've got it right. It was Ice Cube who gave this speech about why rap should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I'm not going to quote it right now, but anybody who's watching this, if you haven't heard that, I would recommend, it's on YouTube, I would recommend you go watch this. His explanation as to why rap should be in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, I think is one of the best explanations I've ever heard. And after he said it, I was like, okay, yeah, all right, you talked me into it. I've changed positions on this now. I'm okay with it. I don't always understand everything about rap. There is some rap that I have listened to that I've liked. I do always try to listen with an open mind. I know many people of my generation say they don't want to understand it. And if that's your attitude, well, then, you're acting like your parents.
Yeah.
But you become your parents. Congratulations. I heard Steve Wilson, who we both, are familiar with. He's a tremendous musician, but he's also gained a great reputation for doing remixes of classic albums,
and doing them in the surround, like the 5.1
and
some
doing an amazing job of it too. Yeah.
Right, exactly.
And he had said that he's glad that, that rap and a lot of the more electronic music that's popular is pissing off parents in the same way that our music did, pissed off our parents. And he says, he said to a certain extent they have to be in something right. He says, I'm not always like understanding all this music, but I can appreciate the fact that it's pissing off parents.
I have to agree with you. I have to acknowledge that, like I said earlier, I have a bias towards listening to certain types of music, not just my coming of age years, but also if the music I hear now, some of my favorite music is music that maybe is grounded in some of those favorite artists that I have. So, and I understand that bias, but, you have to pursue and be passionate about what you love. So again, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is challenging us a little bit, like you said, but they're putting some of these artists maybe outside of our comfort zones or outside of our experience and putting them into the mix.
The argument I usually hear is that it's politics. They want to, it's part of its politics of popularity. They want to appeal to what's popular, the younger audience. That's part of it. And that may be true, but I think that something that occurs to me about this is that if the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame does challenge our perceptions, in fact, regardless of whether it does or not, I really think the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, when they nominate people, they should explain why. Why was this artist nominated? I think they owe music fans around the world an explanation for everybody. There are some artists which most people are going to universally say, yeah, of course they should be in, like Iron Maiden. I don't think anybody has a problem with Iron Maiden being nominated, but if they're going to go outside of the comfort zone of what a good part of the population says, this is rock, this is not rock, then they should explain why. Why is this rap artist nominated? And I'm not picking on rap. I'm just saying there are still a lot of people out there that don't understand why. I have decided I have no problem with it moving forward. I have no problem with it anymore. I used to, I don't. But I think that they need to explain why we're nominating this artist. I think also with their nominations, they should educate. That should be also part of the explanation. The reason why we've chosen this obscure musician that you've never heard of and that the majority of the general public has never heard of from, say, the 1950s or the 1960s is because of the secret legacy that they gave to the world and how they influenced others. How maybe the general public doesn't know about this artist, but musicians have been heavily influenced over the decades by this one obscure artist. If they nominate someone like that who's not as well known, a lost musical hero of the past, then those nominations should educate the general public as to why.
Yeah,
there should be explanations. This is why, because of what they've done. And I think they owe that to every nomination they do, is that they should educate and with an explanation in their listings. This is why we feel they are worthy of this nomination,
Yeah.
and and are worthy of the potential to be inducted. And I think that would go a long way in, I think maybe some people are always going to be angry, but at least help people to better understand, because people start getting angry and they start saying it's identity politics, it's racial politics, it's all these things. And who knows? Maybe somewhat of what I just said is actually
Yeah.
part of it. Who knows? I'm not going to say it is. I'm not going to say it isn't, because I'm not part of that voting body. I don't know.
Yeah. And
None of us.
like I've told people out there, our viewers before, I'm not a voter, although I've been a music writer for a very long time. I believe it is a number of music critics or industry insiders and past recipients, but yeah, I don't know the selection process, but I did like your idea that you talked about, like maybe it's a good idea for the fans to be able to vote for, some of the nominees, maybe get some other names in that we're not seeing,
Yeah.
like some people
They have a. Go
like
ahead.
I was going to just say really quickly, like Hall and Oates, it seemed like it took them far too long to get on the ballot. It just seemed like they were so, the most popular, best-selling duo of all time. It seemed like it took far too long, and they had such success in rock and pop and soul, so many hits, and such a profound impact. And it was amazing that it took that long to get them on the ballot. Maybe whether they deserve to win early or not, but it just seemed like, wait, why haven't they got on the ballot? It took the Cure a really long time to get on the ballot, when I thought that they should have been on there much sooner. But again, I don't know what happens behind the scenes.
I've been a voting member of the Grammy Awards. It's been a couple of years since I was one. And my experiences as a voting member changed my perception about that a lot of people had about what it's like to be a voting member. So I would assume maybe it's the same with the Rock Hall of Fame. There's always going to be politics involved in anything, not necessarily political when we talk about politics right and left, but just politics.
Mhm.
Just like there are office politics,
Right.
just like there are school politics. There's always going to be some certain amount of politics involved. But they do have which is why I think they should explain. This is why we feel these, there should be an accountability where you say, this is why. And if they can make a good argument, good, make a good argument for it. That's hard for people to be able to combat. People are going to, but at least you've made an argument. And I feel that's worthwhile. But you were talking about the fan vote in. I really think that the fan vote in should be really, and we talked about this before we started, it should be more where fans can say, this is who I think should get nominated.
Right.
And you said the downside is that you might see people like artists who aren't deserving start, fan campaigns
Yeah.
getting nominated in. So I think that maybe the way we should do fan voting is set like a time frame, like no one, they have to be, like 30 or 40 years or older as an artist, or years ago, I should say.
Yeah. You
Years
mean
ago,
since the
30 or
first
40 years ago,
since they started recording?
so that you're sticking with legacy.
You're right.
You're going with legacy versus current popularity, because then
Yeah.
otherwise, like you said, you might see a flavor of the week artist start a who's popular on Twitter right now, start a Twitter campaign to get themselves nominated.
Exactly. And that's what you don't
around.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And the one last thing I might say too is, like, in something like the Baseball Hall of Fame, it's going to be based on your statistics, or maybe some records that you set, or some
Mhm.
special ability as on offense or defense. In music, it can't strictly be about sales and commercial success. Like we've both noted, there's, yeah, a band like the Beatles were influential and they sold a lot of records,
Mhm.
but not every artist is going to be in that category. There's some, like a Kate Bush, at least here in the United States, that maybe had some success, but not massive success. But let's say she's so influential that she really does deserve, that nod to at least be nominated, and perhaps to go ahead and be one of the recipients of the award.
I agree. Yeah, just like we said, New York Dolls, MC5, and just like I said, there are occasions when lesser known, obscure historical artists get nominated, and I think it's always important that we recognize those and educate the general public about them, about their
Yeah.
contributions, so they are not so obscure anymore, so that there is more discovery in that respect. Okay, cool. I think I've said everything I want to say. How do you feel?
I feel like I've said more than enough,
Okay.
but we'll see what everyone out there says.
Yeah. Tell us what you think of the nominees. Who are you glad to see? Who do you think shouldn't have been there? Who has been passed over too many times? What are your thoughts? We all say we don't care about these things every year, yet we seem to care every time the new nominees come out. So somewhere along the line, I think we're kidding ourselves when we try to pretend that we're too cool for this. Let us know what you think. Leave a comment. Robert, it's great having you back.
Hey, thanks, Chief.
And
It's great to be
yeah,
back.
let's shake hands here and virtual hands. And let's and definitely let's not be strangers. Let's get together for more videos.
Sounds good. Look forward to that.
Okay. Take care, everybody. Good night.
See you later.
Bye-bye. I shouldn't say good night, just goodbye. Who knows when anybody's watching this stuff. Take care, everybody. Bye.